My question is, what if vanity is less about appearance and more about existential issues? So last month I had a slightly embarrassing piece of writing published in The Guardian, which was exciting but also slightly embarrassing because it was actually about one of my biggest mistakes from 2023, which was specifically dyeing my hair very badly in my parents' bathroom at midnight the night before flying back to the UK from Australia. It was not a well thought out decision, but The Guardian was looking for some light summer read contents, or, Australian summer reads, and I thought, well, I have something that could be entertaining. Yes, dyeing my grey hair black was a decision that was very spontaneous, but also devoid of all wisdom. The final published article is only a little under 1,000 words, but the original article was actually slightly over 2,000 words. Now, seeing as this article did end up entertaining a bunch of people and people seem to enjoy it and have an interest in the story, I thought, you know what, why don't I share the slightly longer version via video essay, because it deals with many of the themes that the original article touches on, only it also offers more analysis about what prompts people to alter their opinions and why is this perceived as vanity? Is it actually always about vanity, or is there something more to it? Or indeed, is there something more to vanity that we haven't really explored enough collectively? This story is written in large part to entertain, as not only did I dye my hair terribly, but also in doing so I actually broke a pact with a friend, a pact that we had both made never to dye our hair, as we both have very grey or greying hair. But ultimately, as you'll find out, the joke was on both of us. Yet the article also asks some more serious questions, such as how does social capital play into the decision to alter one's appearance? And what if vanity is less about looks and more about a desire to feel valued? So I'll share the full-length version of the story first and then unpack a few additional ideas about aging and appearance afterwards. I'd long railed against dyeing my hair. My friend Mateus and I had even made a pact to stay strong under pressure to have less in common with pensioners. Besides, we look fine, we told one another, firmly ignoring that there are cement slabs with higher pigment than our hair combined, and we like how we look. This was true to an extent. Going grey in one's 20s isn't such a blow to the ego, given how many other markers of youth one can still cling to. It is easier to go grey when the result renders one closer to a silver fox than, say, a silver proboscis monkey. Yet the pressure to remain unchanged also proved unrelenting. "Oh no," said a colleague of mine upon hearing that I was only 29 and also seeing my hair. Friends gently and spontaneously offered reassurance that dyeing one's hair isn't that stressful, it can even be fun. Meanwhile, I became increasingly aware that youth and beauty, particularly in the realms of film and broader popular culture, are not usually inclusive of the hoarier segment of the population. My own experience of beauty and the privileges it affords has been one of stark contrast. Following teenage years when I looked so unremarkable that I was actually literally mistaken for a pile of bags once, and I was sat on, thanks Grace, never forget. I had a surprise glow up, age 20, and I was genuinely shocked by how differently people treated me. They treated me with far greater attentiveness and interest in my inner world. Looks should not matter, but it is still easier, especially as a woman, to move through the world when visible in a way the world deems positive and appreciable. This often means, to invoke a fitting strain by Lana Del Rey, being young and beautiful. Yet after walking through the shadow of the Valley of Dye, I can confirm that seeking to return to youth artificially is emphatically not the answer either to the social issue of beauty privilege or the personal issue of pained vanity, or at least caveat, it was not in my experience. When dyeing my hair in my parents' bathroom the night before flying back from their home in Australia back to my home in the UK, I was aware that I was already feeling somewhat distressed. There was sadness at leaving, there was anxiety over self-imposed work and creative projects of various kinds, and guilt also over farewelling people who I love and who love me. And I also felt conscious of my age and of how differently my life looked from that of my friends, several of whom are buying homes and having children, prioritising an adulthood that I guess on some level I kind of always thought I'd have, but which I haven't really prioritised. I also felt that perhaps I'm the kind of personality that, instead of living an honest and peaceful life, instead moves through the world making things unnecessarily challenging for herself and then writes about her mistakes for others' entertainment. Perhaps I was destined to live unhappily, and by my own poor choices and flawed nature no less. In an immediate sense, this speculation turned out to be true. On edge and feeling spontaneous, I had purchased a bottle of bottled dye off the shelf at a discount chemist's earlier that day. It looked approximately the colour my hair used to be. I could have researched products further, however, I knew that were I to do so, I might lose my nerve, so instead I thought YOLO. And somewhat predictably, this was a mistake. I should have stopped at the first sign that this colour was far from my own, but I did not. Had I returned to a childlike mentality upon re-entering my parents' home? Perhaps. Some people speak of feeling juvenile again when staying with parents as a guest. Either way, like a child in a moralistic story, I learnt my lesson. Go hard or go home is not a good approach when one notices that bottle dye labelled soft brown to dark black is actually darker than the Mariana Trench. Yet I'm not here solely to regale you with tales of my mistakes. Rather, I'd like to share what I learnt, specifically about vanity, aging, and existentialism. I used to think dyeing one's hair was a means of reviving a feeling of youth, a delay rather than a beginning to an existential crisis. However, in my experience, dyeing my hair provoked far greater existential angst than anticipated. I felt grief upon realising that my hair's living tones were gone, replaced by an artificial and homogeneous sheen. I felt like I had rejected part of myself, my hereditary imperfections visible in my parents and grandparents. For all such features are technically without value, they do also unite us. Much has already been made of the very real phenomenon wherein women feel pressured to minimise or even eliminate visual signs of ageing. Yet less has been said about the sadness that some people may feel upon farewelling features that connect them to their family members. Feeling like I had betrayed myself in a way was not a side effect I had seen listed on any packaging. Looking like one's family can, at least when in a sentimental mood, offer a peculiar mix of comfort and longing and nostalgia. It can help foster feelings of belonging to a family group as well as a broader ethnic or cultural one. It can instill a sense of pride in something that does not actually merit pride, but which many people take pride in simply by virtue of it being theirs. My height, my sway back, my teeth, my nails, none of these are remarkable, but they bear a familiarity that helps me feel like myself and towards which I therefore have affinity. It doesn't matter if they're beautiful or not. Dyeing one's hair or altering one's appearance can therefore be a means of trying to feel more like how one used to feel. This was certainly the case for me. While I have no desire to be 20 again, part of me would greatly like to return to the idea of 20, the sense which one embodied and also had projected upon oneself that one was still young and full of potential and could still go in any direction. No decisions had yet been made that were grievous or irreversible. I felt nervous at that age, yet in hindsight also light. Conversely now, as an unmarried, child-free woman approaching 30 with no great potential or achievements, cue the Charlotte Lucas meme about I'm 27 and I'm a burden on my family, only I'm older now, I often feel heavier than ever before. I'm aware that I'm about to enter a stage of life during which I will look less young and consequently be treated differently within our looks-obsessed culture. I'm also aware of pressures born of outside perceptions to achieve quickly, for example, as women are likeliest to secure leadership positions within the first 10 years of their career. To stay thin, as thinner people experience less discrimination and are paid better. And also to hang on to whatever looks I have for as long as possible to the bitter end, not least because people deemed conventionally attractive earn more and experience various other privileges. I don't think I ever really believed that dyeing my hair would enable me to deceive myself or others about my age. Rather, I think part of me simply hoped that it would bring me closer to that feeling that I used to have. That I was still young and had time in which to make mistakes. Even though I can rationalise arguments about how one can always create fresh starts and looks don't matter and life can be wonderful at any age, which it can, I still feel trepidation over how I might be negatively impacted as a result of others' perceptions of me, my ageing body and mind, and my perceived social capital. Perhaps vanity, at least for some, is more about searching for feelings of youth and potential and of having social value than it is about looking young per se. Through this lens, vanity emerges as more of an existential anxiety and worthy of compassion, perhaps, rather than how it is widely understood, namely as a weakness of character. Botching my own hair dye job was also ultimately an experience that felt, frankly, a little pathetic and depressing. Standing on the tiled floor with a clock long having passed midnight, nothing significant about me had changed. In my particular case, I had merely succeeded in worsening my appearance and projecting my anxieties in a more physical and embodied form. I was no longer a child, I could make my own mistakes, and levity and horror, there was no one who would strongly seek to save me from myself. Ironically, and including in the weeks and months to come, my uncannily dark hair reminded me far more starkly and persistently of my age and my personal weaknesses and anxieties than my grey hair ever had. It reminded me of death, as I'm a bit dramatic, and it reminded me of the sadness at trying to deny a reality, a mortality that no one can really escape. Finding myself at an age where I had felt the need to dye my hair, had done so, and was reminded of this in the mirror each day, only reinforced my anxieties associated with aging. And ultimately, in particular, the linked anxiety over my parents' mortality, which can be one of the scariest aspects of growing up. Morphing into a grey-haired version of myself and leaving their home yet again formed a stark reminder of how much had changed since I was young and they could protect me. Since I first moved overseas, aged 18, and my father told me that if anything terrible happened, they could be on the first flight over if I needed them. Now, it is far more likely that the emergency will take place in their own home and that it will be me flying back at speed. Can any of us prepare for such things? When I see advancing age reflected in all our faces, I am confronted with the fact that such things are coming and that I cannot stop them from coming. It was time to leave my parents' house and return to my own adult reality. extremely grey hair. A few weeks later, back in Europe, I met up with Mateus. We don't see one another very often as we no longer live in the same city. As per our custom, however, we immediately launched into recapping personal updates, seeking one another's opinions on the latest zeitgeisty cultural issue, and also sharing petty grievances and angst. It's a really good friendship. As in all good friendships, however, honesty is important, and after an hour or so of talking, I felt the truth needed to out. Mateus, I said, "I'm so sorry, I've been weak." He looked puzzled. "My hair," I explained. I'd pulled it back and had it partially obscured by a scarf, very strategically. "If you think I look strange for some reason, you'd be right. I'm weak and I caved into pressure. When I was in Australia, I dyed my hair." He peered at my head. "I did think it looked a bit different," he said. "Ah, I hate it," I exclaimed. "Such a bad decision, so much existential angst and not even a good aesthetic outcome. Your hair," I gestured at his grey waves, "looks fantastic. Don't dye it." Mateus looked sheepish. Then he began laughing, covering his face behind a hand. "But I already have," he said. We began talking at the same time, and so began a long conversation about our parallel forays into the shady world of permanent dye. It turns out that not so long ago, Mateus had also dyed his hair. He had felt anxious about the years building upon years, and him still being unsure about where to go and what to do next. Simultaneously, his mother kept sending him photos from back in Brazil, from when he was a small child. He began comparing himself unfavourably with the past. More, he too found himself seeking a certain lightness associated with youth. "Bad decision," he said, or rather, as we were speaking in Portuguese, decisão ruim. He had dyed his hair back to its very dark original colour. He then spent several weeks in winter in Washington, feeling somewhat miserable about the change and avoiding reflective surfaces. He showed me a lone selfie from the era. His smile looked distinctly pained. "Yeah, I was trying to convince myself here that I was happy," he said. Before so much as a month had passed, he went back to the hairdresser, he had his head shaved, and he swore off dye forever. His hair grew back slowly but steadily, its colours ranging from a darkish grey to a pearly white. Funnily enough, his experience of dyeing his hair ended up being similar to mine, in terms of the existential anxieties related to and stemming from the act. Family, mortality, and authenticity were recurrent themes, far more so than vanity or looks alone. We toasted one another and our friendship of treachery and broken vows. We hugged at the entrance to the metro. "Don't dye your hair," we warned one another, pointing back at each other threateningly as we walked in our separate directions. "Don't do it." Ever older, though only partly wiser, it is a pact I will endeavour to keep. Well, that's the article. I hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. Here are a couple of closing thoughts, I suppose, about the piece. Firstly, something entertaining. After I wrote this piece, I did actually send it to Mateus and was like, "Hey, I'm going to see if I can get this published. Would you feel okay with this article being published as you are represented in it?" And he was like, "Yeah, sure. Although, for the record, I'm actually considering dyeing my hair pink. Who knows?" Anyway, it's also worth mentioning that I can't speak for everyone here. This article was very much written from my own personal experience out of a desire to share something funny, entertain a few people, and also perhaps challenge our concept of vanity and challenge us to explore it a bit more and expand it a bit more. It's worth noting that some people alter their appearance and this feels very right and authentic to them. Dyeing one's hair, for example, could be a great way of almost reclaiming your body or feeling closer to how you used to look if, for example, you've suffered a severe illness and you really want to kind of get back to looking how you looked before. Or, it may just be a matter of personal preference, and that is completely fine. I had an existential moment when dyeing my hair, but there's not necessarily a moral to the story, except perhaps that you should really research bottle dye before you use it. Learn from my mistakes. Anyway, I hope this piece offered some food for thought on vanity and on what might be really going on when people choose to alter their appearance. I find it really interesting that altering one's appearance is quite often met with scorn or contempt or accusations of vanity, almost as if we want to distance ourselves from the supposedly shallow, weak, vain people like myself who alter their appearance in some way. It's interesting that these people are met with these kinds of negative emotions rather than compassion or curiosity. What might be going on with someone that leads them to want to change how they look? I'd argue that it often has far more to do with a desire to belong and to be valued than it does to do with simple narcissism. So in conclusion, thank you for spending this time with me. Have a beautiful day, and don't just say, close enough, it'll be fine, when using bottle dye. I looked like a knockoff version of Morticia Adams for a good while there, and the commission I was paid by The Guardian will not cover the costs of the therapy that I need. Elegance. Elegance.